When people imagine Russia's worst-case scenario, they often picture a clean breakup, like the Soviet Union. New flags, new borders, a painful divorce, but still a divorce, not a house fire. That's not the darkest outcome. The truly grim future is when the map stays the same. Russia remains one country on paper, but the state stops working. No reliable center, no predictable rules, just a vast space where power becomes local, temporary, and often violent. We can predict the future with certainty, but we can build models, a way to see where today's incentives, fears, and institutions naturally lead if nothing interrupts the logic. I'm Elvira Bary, a writer born in the Soviet Union, and tonight I'll walk you through Russia's worst-case scenario, how it happens, who rises when the center weakens, and why the version of collapse can be far more dangerous than a breakup. Here's our roadmap. The talent shredder. Why autocracies survive by eliminating capable rivals. The Smuta Trap. Why Russia's collapse could be uglier than the USSR's. New bosses rise. Who takes power when the current elites lose control? Life without center. What daily life looks like when the state exists but doesn't function. The violence market. How force becomes a paid service. The rescue with strings. Who might help and what they'll demand in return. Rules that heal. What real reconstruction would have to look like. If independent analysis matters to you, subscribe, like, and share. It helps these videos reach people who want depth, not slogans. And if you'd like to support the channel directly, you can join my think tank, use PayPal or Super Things, or give the video hype points so more people see it. Now, let's start with the first mechanism that makes the scenario possible. The talent shredder. In a democracy, a leader is always competing. Rivals are built into the system. They criticize him, expose mistakes, and offer voters an alternative. That constant pressure is frustrating, but it also acts as a safety rail. Authoritarian power works the opposite way. An authoritarian leader aims to stay in office indefinitely, which means he can't allow a real rival to exist. First, he neutralizes open political opponents. Then, he turns to a harder problem. Rivals can emerge from inside his own circle. So, he has to make sure his subordinates never become strong enough, popular enough, or independent enough to threaten him. That is why you don't see remarkable people around Putin. His inner circle looks so ineffective because competence can be dangerous in an autocracy. A charismatic figure can steal the spotlight. A problem solver can look like the better option in a crisis. Someone who can inspire hope can redirect public loyalty. A talented general can build personal loyalty inside the armed forces, the one thing an authoritarian can't risk. This is also why the regime treats change itself as the enemy, regardless of ideology. It doesn't matter whether a challenger is liberal, nationalist, or something in between. If a person can mobilize people, they become a threat. So over time, potential rivals end up in prison, in exile, or in graves. And the result is a state led by one man, surrounded not by the best, but by the safest. The more insecure the ruler, the stronger the temptation to hire the weakest. Over time, that turns the whole state into a talent shredder. If you're ambitious, you'll learn a new survival skill. Don't be the smartest person in the room. Don't become too popular. Don't build a team that feels loyal to you first instead of the supreme leader. Russia's political space has been steadily sterilized by this logic. And there's another layer people often miss: the internal culture of Putin's state machine. When power is built on fear, humiliation becomes a management tool. You don't need written rules if everyone understands that one wrong phrase, one inconvenient truth, one moment of independence can ruin your life. That atmosphere selects a very specific type of person, the obedient performer. Not the builder, not the crisis manager, not the professional who tells you what you don't want to hear. Now, imagine the end of Putin's era. The details don't matter. Old age, illness, incapacity, retirement. What matters is that he leaves behind a system that was designed to function only with him at the center. In that moment, many members of the elite will do what elites often do when they sense chaos coming. They will leave. Right now, Putin keeps a tight grip on them, and everyone understands the basic rule of authoritarian politics. If the leader decides you are a problem, distance and passports won't necessarily save you. But once the center weakens, the incentives flip. The most informed people, the ones with the clearest view of how fragile the system is, will be the first to hedge. They'll move money, relocate families, and disappear to places where their assets and bodies feel safer. Dubai, Cyprus, London, Miami, and yes, many of them have had foreign passports, residency permits, or long-term Plan B arrangements for years, just in case. And then you get the real nightmare. Not a clean change of power, but a machine suddenly void of those who used to run it. We've seen versions of this in Iraq. Saddam Hussein built a system that rewarded loyalty and punished real authority. After 2003, the Baathification removed large parts of the old state structure, including many senior officials. Whatever you think of the policy morally, the practical effect was brutal. Institutions lost experienced people fast. Violence and fragmentation spread through the country. Years later, many Iraqis still talk about the stability they lost after Saddam, even while knowing what kind of dictator he was. That's how low the bar falls when the state stops doing basic things. The Smuta Trap. The USSR collapsing was traumatic, but it was still a political breakup with functioning replacement states. Ministries became ministries under new flags. Taxes still got collected. Police still showed up. Trains still ran. The worst case is when the state fabric tears. Not civil war in the classic sense. Civil war needs a big idea, even a stupid one. Or at least a clean enemy image. Communists, fascists, traitors, heretics. A failed state is different. It is closer to a Smuta, a period of Russian history in the 17th century when the central government collapsed. Everyone is tired, angry, and broke, and the slogan becomes "every man for himself." What triggers this state of things? Money shortages. In modern Russia, the federal center is the main player. It finances the security services, large parts of the bureaucracy, and a significant share of regional budgets through transfers. That dependence is highly uneven. In some regions, federal money is a minor supplement. In others, like Dagestan or Tuva, it can account for roughly 2/3 of revenues. This architecture was not accidental. It was built to keep potentially restless regions financially dependent, so local authorities never have enough resources to act independently and must rely on Moscow's goodwill. Now, imagine a shock that leaves the center unable to pay on time. Not just teachers and doctors, but the people in uniforms, the security services, and the clerks who keep the paper state running. When salaries stop, two things happen quickly. First, local officials start finding money wherever they can. New fees, kickbacks, pressure on businesses, extortion disguised as inspections. Some of this exists already, but the scale would change overnight. It's one thing when a business can stay afloat while paying bribes. It's another when officials become desperate and squeeze until the business breaks because they need cash immediately. Second, regions stop sending money upward. Why would a governor wire taxes to Moscow if the center can't even pay the police in his own city? That is the death spiral. The center grows weaker, so it pays less, so it gets less, so it pays even less. Decrees from Moscow stop being executed, not because of ideology, but because nobody gets rewarded for obedience anymore. Russia has already tasted a small version of this. In the late 1990s, wage arrears became a mass phenomenon. In 1998, coal miners in places like Vorkuta and Kuzbas went unpaid for months and escalated into the famous rail war, blocking key rail lines to force payment. You do not need a political program to do that. You just need an empty fridge. New bosses rise. When the center weakens, the question is who can organize force and money locally. Three groups rise first. 1. Siloviki, who cannot leave. Siloviki are powerful figures with backgrounds in military, intelligence, and security services. Many of them have cash. Some have stash networks. All have access to weapons and people trained to use them. In a normal state, their power is limited by law and hierarchy. In a Smuta, these limits are no more. 2. Businessmen with serious private security. Russia has a huge private security ecosystem, and it's not limited to a guy in a uniform at the entrance of a mall. There are licensed security firms, unlicensed enforcers, fixers, former police and military specialists, and entire networks that know how to do surveillance, intimidation, transport, guarding, and rapid response. In normal times, this would sit in the shadow of the state. But when the state can't reliably guarantee safety, contracts, and property rights, the most valuable asset is not money. It's organized protection. And the people who already have it become the local power centers. 3. Local or national leaders with a real community behind them, not followers online. A living network. Diaspora groups, ethnic republic elites, religious structures, veteran brotherhoods. When the country falls apart, a tight community becomes a fortress. The new local leaders will be strong enough to control their own territory, but too weak to unify the whole country. Think of a patchwork of mini regimes, each one collecting taxes at the road, each one writing its own rules. Now, at the outside world. Who do Russia's neighbors talk to? Who gets fuel, food, loans, and equipment? Who gets called the legitimate authority? Outsiders will look for the person who can guarantee three things: basic order, predictable deals, and control over dangerous assets like nukes. And this is where the trap tightens. If the top layer in the new reality is made of people with either security or criminal background, aid becomes loot, money is stolen, supplies vanish, equipment is resold, promises are broken. You can call it government, But if the core logic is theft, the country will not climb out. It will just rotate new small rulers through the same old cycle. Life without center. In this scenario, Russia still exists. But the center stops doing the one job that makes it a center, enforcing a shared system. Their first visible thing is a mass exodus. Anyone with money, documents, and foreign ties tries to leave. Not because they hate the country, because they do not want to be stuck inside a collapsing system. Many will look toward the closest reachable places like Belarus and Central Asia. The Eurasian Economic Union gives citizens of member states easier labor movement inside the bloc, and neighboring countries like Kazakhstan have clear rules for visa-free stays. Inside the country, jobs shrink fast. Enterprises tied to state orders stall when contracts stop being paid. That pushes people into small trade, repairs, transport, barter, and whatever cash services still function. Alongside that, banditry grows because it is also a job that pays daily. The biggest losers are the people who cannot move and cannot hustle. Pensioners, disabled people, and naturally, wounded soldiers who came back with broken bodies and no stable benefits. And then the complex structures snap. Everything that's built on trust and collective agreements can no longer work. Banks are trust plus central coordination. Insurance is trust plus courts. Courts are trust plus enforcement. When those links fail, property becomes physical possession. You do not own an apartment because you have papers. You own it because you can defend the door. Police morph into violence as a service. You pay to point them at someone. You pay to make a problem disappear. You pay to get a passport, a license, or the right stamp. Healthcare degrades in layers. First, high-tech medicine, then supplies, then specialists. You end up with pockets of competence kept alive by volunteers, local donors, and stubborn professionals. Education collapses the same way, not overnight, but steadily, because complex schooling needs stable funding, textbooks, exams, and teacher salaries. Remove stability, and we get a few islands of learning and a sea of neglect. Environmental protection also breaks down because enforcement is expensive. Illegal logging, poaching, and dumping rise when no one is paid to stop them. Yes, the war with Ukraine ends in this scenario, not by peace talks, by broken logistics and unpaid soldiers. But the end of the war does not mean the end of violence. It means a large pool of veterans comes home into a collapsing economy. And we already have warnings about what they can do, even without total collapse. Russia is already seeing spikes in violent crime linked to returning fighters, including ex-convicts recruited for the war. It's much like what happened after the war in Afghanistan in the 1980s and the 1990s. But on a much bigger scale. The violence market. When the center breaks, violence becomes a service. The first motive is greed. Someone wants your money or your apartment or your business, and the fastest way to get it is not a lawsuit. It's a man with a gun. This is how banditry grows and becomes an industry. You grab people who can pay. You grab relatives of people who left. You shake down small shops. You tax roads. You protect markets. In a working state, this is crime. In a failed one, this is employment. Russia has a dark example of what kidnapping as economy looks like. In 1998, 4 foreign telecom engineers were abducted in Grozny. Their captors eventually demanded a massive ransom. The case ended in murder. That's what happens when armed groups discover that a human body is a bank account with legs. Once that lesson spreads, it's hard to unlearn. The second motive is revenge dressed up as justice. A collapse creates a craving for simple explanation. People don't want a spreadsheet. They want a face. And the easiest story is we were betrayed. Not we built a rotten system. Not we stole and lied for years. Betrayal is cleaner. Betrayal gives you targets. So you get extrajudicial punishments, lists, and public shaming. A neighbor pointing a finger and someone disappearing. In the early 20th century, Russia had the so-called Black Hundreds. They were ultra-nationalist street groups that fed on fear and loyalty to the throne. They were also tied to pogrom violence. The same mechanism will work here. When institutions weaken, politics moves from parliament to the street. And the street rewards the loudest, simplest hate. Germany's Weimar period shows the same mechanism in a different costume. The SA, the brown shirts, turned political meetings into intimidation theater. They broke up opponents, marched, and created the feeling that order can be bought with fists. People who are exhausted start accepting that bargain. They say, at least someone is in charge. That is how a society talks itself into a cage. And then there is the next danger. Local wars. Not a civil war with banners, more like wall-to-wall fights between armed groups that control districts, roads, and warehouses. They don't need grand ideology, they need fuel, cash, and pride. One convoy gets stopped, one commander gets humiliated, and suddenly a neighborhood turns into a front line. The rescue with strings. When a country can govern itself, the quickest fix always looks the same: ask outsiders for help. People don't care about abstract sovereignty when the lights go out and pensions stop. They want normal life back. So some new authority, whoever holds the capital or the pipelines, goes to neighbors with a deal. Cash now in exchange for concessions later. Ports, minerals, railroads, long leases, and special tax zones. Export and import preferences. It will be presented as temporary, but these kind of things rarely stays temporary. There is also one bargaining chip that changes everything: nuclear weapons and nuclear infrastructure. In the early 1990s, the world faced a real fear: lose nukes in the wreckage of the Soviet collapse. The response was logistics and money. The non-Luger Cooperative Threat Reduction Program is an example of how outside help can secure and dismantle dangerous arsenals when states are weak or transitioning. If Russia ever hits a Smuta-level collapse, a similar logic would return fast. Outsiders would want guarantees that nuclear assets are controlled, guarded, and professionally maintained. Russia's own elites, if they are desperate enough, could trade pieces of that sovereignty for immediate assistance. Would people protest? Some would. But a collapsing society has a different hierarchy of needs. When you are choosing between pride and insulin, pride loses. China is the obvious candidate for a heavy transactional rescue. It will come to Russia's aid not out of charity, but with its own best interest in mind. A huge neighbor sliding into chaos is a security threat, and it's also a business opportunity. China's price for help would be steep. Real concessions, real influence over the borderlands and the flow of resources. Maybe Even parts of the Russian Far East handed back to China that used to own them before Russia took over. The West could also get pulled in, especially if nuclear risk spikes. But the West has its own trap. It loves dealing with one strong man because it feels efficient. One phone call, one signature, one handshake. That approach is poison here. If outsiders help by empowering a single local boss, they might stabilize the structure, but they also rebuild the same personalist structure that caused the collapse. It's like putting the same cracked bolt back into the same wheel and acting surprised when it snaps again. Rules that heal. If Russia ever falls into this kind of collapse, fixing it won't mean backing the best candidate for a new leader. It will be putting in place the new kind of rules. The state's very backbone has to change. Today, the system is designed to concentrate resources so that one clan can control them. A repair system has to do the opposite. Make it hard for any person to monopolize money, violence, and truth. That starts with checks and balances that actually bite. Not decorative courts, not a parliament that votes the way it's told. Real veto points, real budgets in regions, real oversight that can block a bad decision even when it's popular. A parliamentary republic fits this logic better than a super-presidential arrangement because it forces coalition and bargaining. It also makes it near impossible for one person or one clan to take over the whole country. White regional autonomy matters here too because it reduces the all-or-nothing stakes of the center. Then comes the hardest surgery – siloviki and courts. You can build a normal country when police and judges offer their services to the highest bidder. There's a reason so many post-authoritarian transitions treat security sector reform as the first wall. Georgia's early 2000s police overhaul is one of the clearest modern examples. The state disbanded a corrupt traffic police force and rebuilt the patrol police from scratch. It wasn't perfect and it had its own problems, but it shows the scale of change required when corruption becomes a lifestyle. Economics is the next pillar. A bottleneck economy is fragile by design. When a country lives off one revenue stream, whoever controls that stream controls the whole politics. Diversification is not only smart in the long run, but also anti-coup insurance. It creates multiple centers of competence and income that can resist a single predator. Education is where the long repair happens. Russia can't rebuild itself on math and coding alone. It needs a strong humanities knowledge base in ordinary school, taught seriously. History without myth. Political science without propaganda. Basic psychology, logic. A real habit of working with cognitive errors. People who can spot manipulation are harder to hurt. And finally, you need cultural integration with Europe at a human level. It sounds impossible today. It once sounded impossible for France and Germany as well, after centuries of war. And yet the Elysee Treaty created a framework that reached far beyond diplomats. Student exchanges, institutional partnerships, town twinning, shared commemorations and festivals. That's how hostility fades. Not because everyone becomes friends overnight, but because hatred stops being the default language. So that's the worst future for Russia, and a realistic path for the West to help it build back better. My question for you is this, and I really want to read your answers. In your country, what's the one institution that keeps daily life glued together? And if it failed, what would people fear most the next morning? If you want more analysis like this, the kind that looks at the machinery, not just the headlines, subscribe, like, and share. It's the simplest way to tell the algorithm that depth still has an audience. And if you'd like to support the work directly, you can join my think tank, use PayPal or Superthings, or tap the Hype button. All the links are under the video. And if you want to feel what a real Russian Smuta looks like from the inside, read my novel Russian Treasures. It follows the 1917 revolution and the Civil War. The link is in the description. Thank you for watching, take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next one.